object speeding toward Earth, and some actual bona fide experts think it might not be your typical space rock, or maybe any kind of rock at all. The transmission came suddenly, piercing through the quiet void of space with an urgency that unsettled even the most seasoned observers. The object in question, 3I Atlas, an interstellar visitor not native to our solar system, had already been the subject of intense speculation since its detection. Its path, its strange composition, and its uncharacteristic brightness shifts had raised questions that few dared to answer out loud. But when the data from the latest transmission arrived, it carried a message so stark, so unambiguous, that it shifted the entire narrative. No longer was 3I Atlas an enigmatic rock hurtling through space. It was now something deliberate, something purposeful, and its broadcast confirmed what many had secretly feared all along. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. For months, astronomers had tracked 3I Atlas, watching its trajectory bend in ways that suggested active course corrections. The patterns could have been dismissed as natural outgassing, cometary activity, or observational errors, but the persistence of these anomalies forced deeper investigation. And then came the unmistakable sequence, a modulated signal structured in a way that no natural phenomenon could explain. This was not cosmic noise, not a pulsar, not the random whisper of radio static from the galactic background. It was organized. It was deliberate. It was directed. What made the revelation so chilling was not simply that 3I Atlas was transmitting. It was the content of that transmission. Encoded within the burst of data was a framework eerily similar to communication protocols designed by humans, as though the senders had studied, understood, and mirrored our own attempts at interstellar messaging. The structure was precise, using mathematical constants, ratios, and repeating sequences that screamed of intelligent origin. And within those sequences were warnings, patterns that could be interpreted as markers of boundaries, prohibitions, or even claims of ownership. The implications unraveled quickly across the scientific community. For decades, humanity had speculated about first contact, but always framed it in terms of curiosity or cautious optimism. What if the visitors came bearing knowledge? What if they were benevolent explorers? But 3I Atlas was not behaving like an emissary of peace. Its signal was sharp, unwavering, and almost confrontational in tone. It was as if the object were broadcasting not to open dialogue, but to stake a claim, to issue a declaration. And it was impossible to ignore the timing. The transmission came precisely when the object's path brought it closest to Earth's sphere of influence, as if it wanted to be certain we heard it. The dread settled in with the realization that the transmission was not a one-off burst. It repeated again and again, at intervals too exact to be accidental. This persistence suggested intent, perhaps even urgency. Every repetition seemed like a demand, a refusal to be overlooked. And when spectrographic analysis revealed faint variations in the repeated signal, variations that could be instructions, coordinates, or even threats, the weight of the discovery crushed any lingering hopes of benignity. Humanity was no longer gazing at a silent, interstellar traveler. It was staring into the deliberate gaze of something, or someone, that had noticed us. The fears that had once been whispered behind closed doors became impossible to suppress. If 3I Atlas was a probe, then it was designed to transmit, observe, and possibly guide something else. Its trajectory, while outwardly chaotic, suddenly seemed more like reconnaissance, a scouting pattern across the solar system. That raised the question no one wanted to answer aloud. If this was the scout, where was the fleet? The mind could not help but conjure the possibility that behind 3I Atlas lay objects cloaked in the darkness between stars, waiting for confirmation before advancing. Beyond astronomy, the geopolitical implications were staggering. Governments that had once dismissed talk of extraterrestrial threats as fringe paranoia were now forced to confront undeniable evidence. The transmission was not merely intercepted by one observatory. It was independently confirmed across multiple nations, with each facility receiving the same patterns. No country could monopolize the discovery, and no nation could pretend it had not heard. For the first time, humanity was united not by choice, but by the inescapable reality of an external voice speaking from the void. And yet, unity did not breed comfort. Instead, it fanned the flames of fear. Analysts pored over the sequences, some convinced the signals were warnings to stay away from certain regions of V, others reading them as coordinates marking future points of convergence. A darker interpretation took hold, that the broadcast was a declaration of surveillance, a way of saying, "We are watching, we are aware, and this territory is no longer solely yours." The fact that the transmission came from an interstellar object, something that had crossed the immense gulf between stars, underscored the imbalance. Whoever or whatever sent it had mastered journeys humanity could barely imagine. As the repetition of the message continued, so too did the unease it provoked. The realization dawned that Earth's first confirmed contact was not with a signal drifting benignly across millennia of space, but with an active probe operating in our immediate neighborhood. This was no distant echo. It was a voice speaking in real time, a presence inside the boundaries of our home system. That proximity alone magnified the sense of vulnerability. Earth was not merely observed from afar, it was being addressed directly, and that meant it was within reach. Scientists struggled to remain objective, but the human imagination could not be restrained. If this was a probe, then what had it already learned? Did it carry with it detailed scans of Earth's defenses, maps of its electromagnetic emissions, catalogs of its technological signatures? The fear was not just that humanity had been noticed, but that it had been measured, evaluated, and possibly judged. And the cold, unyielding nature of the transmission suggested that the judgment was not favorable. Even the silence between transmissions seemed heavy with intent. It was as though the object were allowing time for a response, waiting to see if humanity would attempt communication. But therein lay the greatest dilemma of all. Should we answer? To remain silent might be seen as weakness, an acknowledgement of helplessness. To reply, however, could reveal even more about ourselves, our languages, our technology, our vulnerabilities. The very act of engagement could be a trap, a way of drawing us further into an interaction we did not control. The philosophical weight of the moment pressed as heavily as the scientific. For centuries, humans had pondered their place in the cosmos, wondering if they were alone. That question had now been answered, but not in the way most had hoped. The universe was not empty, not silent, not indifferent. It was inhabited, it was aware, and it was capable of reaching across the stars. The first word it had spoken to us was one of warning, or perhaps of dominance. That realization alone was enough to shift the axis of human self-understanding. Every new analysis of the signal brought more troubling possibilities. Some researchers insisted the variations within the repeated sequence were an escalating progression, as though the sender were increasing its pressure, demanding recognition. Others argued the fluctuations were merely test patterns, ways of probing our capacity to decode and comprehend. Either interpretation was unsettling. If the signal was a demand, it meant humanity was already subject to expectations it had not agreed to. If it was a test, it meant someone was actively measuring our ability to understand and perhaps deciding whether we were worth further contact. The more one stared at the facts, the more they seemed to point toward an undeniable truth. This was not a random encounter. 3I Atlas had not simply stumbled into our solar system by accident. Its trajectory, its timing, and its transmission all suggested intentionality. That realization redefined everything humanity thought it knew about interstellar travel. For a probe to arrive here, transmitting in real time, implied a civilization with capabilities far beyond our own. One that had chosen to send an emissary or a sentinel into our space, and so the worst fears began to crystallize into something more than speculation. This was not the prelude to a friendly exchange. This was reconnaissance, perhaps even a declaration. The signal's cold repetition carried with it the weight of inevitability. Something had reached across the void, tapped on the fragile bubble of Earth's isolation, and reminded us that we were not the masters of our destiny, not the undisputed occupants of our cosmic neighborhood. We had been noticed, and the notice was not one of welcome. From that moment onward, every eye turned skyward, listening to the repeated message, watching the silent traveler sweep its path through the solar system. And though no aftermath had yet unfolded, the implications were already carved deep into human consciousness. The transmission from 3I Atlas had changed everything. It had spoken, and in doing so, it had confirmed the fears that had haunted humanity's imagination for centuries. We are not alone, and those who dwell beyond the stars may not come as friends. The signal from 3I Atlas had already shattered assumptions. But what made it even more unnerving was the sheer silence that followed its relentless broadcast. Once the patterns were recognized as artificial, astronomers, linguists, and cryptographers around the globe rushed to decode its finer details. Yet, as every layer of interpretation peeled away, the underlying reality became harder to escape. The object was behaving like a messenger, one with an agenda that appeared calculated rather than accidental. Humanity had spent centuries searching the skies for signs of life, and when the message finally came, it was cloaked in precision and authority, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The object itself, as observed through high-powered telescopes, seemed ordinary on the surface. Its exterior reflected light unevenly, a quality first attributed to tumbling or outgassing, but once the transmission began, those assumptions felt less credible. No comet or asteroid had ever aligned its activity with such exacting regularity. The transmission began when 3I Atlas crossed into a favorable observational arc, almost as if it had been waiting for the exact moment Earth could not ignore it. The synchronization was too perfect, the timing too deliberate. It was not broadcasting blindly into the void, it was broadcasting at us. One unsettling factor was the method of communication itself. The encoded signal appeared to have layers, base sequences of mathematical constants that could be universally recognized, but also more complex arrangements woven into the fabric of the transmission. Researchers noted how the sequence used the hydrogen line, a frequency long considered the most logical choice for interstellar communication. That choice alone carried an implication. Whoever sent it knew enough about cosmic observation to select the very channel humanity had once suggested would be most universally understood. It was as if they had anticipated our thinking, tailored the message to match our methods, and then deployed it at a scale we could not dismiss. The longer scientists studied the object, the less it resembled any natural body. Its rotation did not follow typical patterns. Its trajectory, though subtle, showed corrections, like an object nudging itself along an intended course, rather than drifting aimlessly under gravity. This realization was staggering. It suggested not only that the probe was artificial, but that it was active, powered, and guided. That fact raised questions no one had answers for. What was propelling it? What energy source allowed it to continue its path across interstellar distances? Was it autonomous, Or was it receiving commands from a distant point of origin? For humanity, this was a moment of uncomfortable clarity. The universe had always been vast, incomprehensible in scope. Yet, for all its emptiness, Earth had felt isolated, protected by distance. Now, with the arrival of 3i Atlas and its transmission, that illusion dissolved. Something had crossed the gulf. Something had chosen to arrive. And, more disturbingly, something had chosen to speak. The implications stretched far beyond astronomy. Philosophy, politics, and the collective psyche all shifted under the weight of the realization. Humanity was no longer an observer of the cosmos. It had become a participant in a dialogue it did not initiate. The design of the signal carried additional concerns. Analysts argued that it bore hallmarks of redundancy, as though the sender expected interference or corruption of the message, and had built-in fail-safes to preserve its meaning. That level of foresight was terrifying in itself. It suggested experience, a history of long-range communication, and an understanding of cosmic conditions that humanity was only beginning to grasp. Each repeated burst of the message was not a mere echo, but a calculated reaffirmation, reinforcing the original content and adding faint variations that might represent instructions or expansions. The method was efficient, elegant, and unsettlingly confident. Some theorists speculated that the probe was not simply broadcasting, but also listening. Sensitive instruments revealed fluctuations in the transmission intervals, as though the signal were adjusting itself in response to Earth's own emissions. The possibility that 3i Atlas was actively scanning our planet, adapting to our communication environment, ignited alarm. If it was listening, then it already knew more about us than we could ever hope to conceal. Every radio wave, every broadcast, every satellite transmission was an open book to an intelligence capable of parsing it. The very thought that we had been unknowingly transmitting our existence into space for over a century now seemed not merely naive, but reckless. Beyond the scientific community, the cultural impact deepened. Ancient fears and myths resurfaced in light of the discovery, as if the transmission had tapped into a collective, subconscious memory of visitation. Religious leaders debated whether this moment signaled divine revelation or existential threat. Philosophers weighed the meaning of human progress, if another intelligence had already surpassed us so completely. The average citizen, caught between awe and dread, grappled with the realization that their world was no longer isolated. The stars above, once romanticized as distant and unreachable, now loomed with potential danger. Governments faced their own dilemmas. The transmission had arrived in full clarity across international observatories, stripping away the option of secrecy. Yet transparency did not guarantee unity. Some nations argued for immediate attempts at communication to show strength and willingness to engage. Others urged silence, warning that any acknowledgement could further expose Earth's vulnerabilities. Military strategists weighed the unthinkable behind closed doors. If this probe represented a scout, what defenses, if any, could humanity muster against a civilization advanced enough to send it? The energy fueling the probe's course was perhaps the most disturbing mystery of all. Its propulsion system, if it had one, was invisible to detection. No thermal emissions, no visible outgassing, no exhaust trail betrayed its method of travel. That left only possibilities far beyond human engineering. Perhaps light sails powered by distant beams, or technologies not yet imaginable. This revelation reframed the probe not just as an emissary, but as evidence of a civilization that had already solved problems humanity still considered insurmountable. The scale of that advancement created a chilling disparity, and then there was the nature of the message itself. While much of it was numerical scaffolding designed for universal recognition, Embedded patterns hinted at symbolic meaning. Some saw them as boundaries, demarcations of space not to be crossed. Others saw them as coordinates, mapping locations within the galaxy that may have significance to the senders. A more unsettling interpretation viewed them as instructions, perhaps commands, to test how humanity would respond. The inability to agree on a single interpretation only deepened the unease. Every option carried danger. If the signal marked territory, it meant Earth had already trespassed. If it conveyed coordinates, it might be a summons or a trap. And if it was a command, ignoring it could invite consequences no one wanted to imagine. The very presence of the signal reframed humanity's place in the cosmos. For millennia, Earth had lived in the tension between isolation and aspiration, wondering whether it was alone. Now that question was settled, but the answer was not comforting. The universe was not silent, and it was not indifferent. It was inhabited, deliberate, and capable of reaching across incomprehensible distances to deliver a message with clarity and precision. The shock was not just in being noticed, but in realizing that we were being spoken to from a position of power as subjects rather than equals. Every passing hour of 3i Atlas's continued transmission eroded the old narratives. The idea of human exceptionalism, the assumption of dominance within our own domain, evaporated. The cosmos had always been vast, but now it was also occupied, and humanity had stumbled into a reality where it was no longer the only voice. The signal confirmed it. The probe confirmed it. The unsettling consistency of its presence confirmed it. And that confirmation was not wrapped in the promise of friendship, but in the authority of a declaration. The consequences reached into every discipline. Linguists struggled with the semiotic weight of interpreting a language not built for human minds. Engineers wrestled with the technological disparities suggested by the probe's existence. Psychologists prepared for waves of existential dread that might overwhelm populations. Even artists and storytellers, long accustomed to imagining contact, found themselves at a loss, their visions dwarfed by the starkness of reality. The probe was no longer fiction. It was fact. And the fact was far colder, far sharper than any story. As telescopes tracked 3i Atlas, moving steadily along its trajectory, the world realized the enormity of what had occurred. The object was not simply passing through, not simply a visitor leaving behind curiosity. It had spoken. It had announced itself with precision and confidence. And though it continued its journey, the imprint it left behind was indelible. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us your thoughts on 3i Atlas's strange transmission so far. We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.